My name is Margaret Collins, and the day my grandmother Evelyn's will was read will never leave me. I was standing in the mahogany-paneled conference room of her attorney's office, the scent of lemon polish and old paper in the air, my palms still trembling from the grief of burying her only 2 days earlier. Evelyn had been more than a grandmother to me. She had been my rescuer, my shield, my true mother. She had taken me in when my own parents made it clear that I was nothing more than a punching bag and a scapegoat. As I sat in that leather chair, the executor slid a thick envelope across the table and announced that every piece of property, every bank account, every stock and bond, and even the sprawling Victorian house with its rose garden and iron gates was left solely to me. My breath caught in my chest. I wanted to cry, but not out of greed or shock. It was the weight of Evelyn's trust. The knowledge that she believed in me so completely that she wanted her legacy, her life's work, her hard-earned fortune to rest in my hands. But just as I pressed my trembling fingers against that envelope, the door slammed open so hard the brass handle struck the wall. And there they were, Richard and Helen Collins, my parents. The very people who had beaten me until I cowered, who had told me I was worthless, who had gaslit me into believing no one would ever believe my screams. I had not seen them in 15 years. Yet now, on the day when I should have been mourning and quietly honoring the only woman who ever fought for me, they appeared. My father's frame was broader but slumped with drink, his face flushed red, his eyes bloodshot yet sharp with calculation. My mother's hair was styled high, pearls gleaming against her neck, but her smile was venom thin. They walked in like they owned the room, like Evelyn's death was their invitation to rise from the grave of the past and claim what they believed was theirs. The attorney stammered, caught off guard, but Richard's voice sliced through the silence. "That's our family money," he growled, pointing a finger directly at me. "Hand it over or you'll regret it." My heart pounded so violently I could feel the pulse in my ears. Every scar, every memory of the belt across my back, every night locked in the basement with only the sound of my mother whispering that I was insane, came flooding back. I thought of the time my father shoved me into the wall so hard, I split my lip open, and when neighbors asked, my mother smiled sweetly and said I had tripped. And now, in this pristine office, under the humming fluorescent light, they stood like predators smelling blood. Helen stepped closer, her perfume cloying and suffocating. She bent toward me, her words a hiss only I could hear. "You think you're special because that old woman spoiled you. You're nothing without us. This was always ours." Her nails, painted crimson, tapped the table, inches from my envelope, a threat more chilling than a slap. The attorney cleared his throat, muttering about legal rights about the will being airtight, but I barely heard him. My father's hand slammed onto the table, rattling the glass of water beside me. He leaned in so close I could smell the stale liquor on his breath. "Listen to me, Margaret," he said, his tone low and poisonous. "You either share what rightfully belongs to your blood, or I promise you'll pay." The room spun. I wanted to scream, to tell them to leave, to call security, but I sat frozen. Not out of fear this time, but out of calculation. I realized in that moment that Evelyn had not just left me money. She had left me the power to finally end this cycle of abuse, to face them not as the terrified girl in a locked basement, but as a woman with resources, with law, with truth on her side. I lifted my chin slowly, my fingers still tight around the envelope. My voice was steadier than I expected. "You abandoned me," I said quietly, but every syllable carried. "You beat me, humiliated me, told me I was nothing. You left me to rot. Evelyn saved me. And now, you dare come here after 15 years on the day I bury her and demand what she gave me." Helen's smirk faltered for just a flicker of a second. Richard's jaw tightened. The attorney shifted uncomfortably, clearly bracing for violence. And in that instant, I knew the war had just begun. My parents had come back from the shadows not to reconcile, not to mourn, but to reclaim control, to gaslight me once more into submission. But I was not the child they had broken, not anymore. I would fight them, and this time I would not lose. When I was 10 years old, I stopped believing in the word family. People like to paint childhood in colors of laughter toys and birthday cakes, but mine was a gray blur of bruises, slammed doors, and whispered lies that cut deeper than any belt. My father Richard was a man who turned every evening into a battlefield. He smelled of whiskey more often than soap, and when the liquor hit his veins, the house transformed into a cage. The leather belt that hung from the hook in the kitchen wasn't just for holding up his pants. It was his weapon of choice. I can still hear the snap of it as he yanked it off the hook, the whistle through the air before it landed across my back, leaving raised welts that burned for days. My mother Helen was sharper than the belt. She wielded words like knives always aimed to cut my spirit. "You're worthless, Margaret. You'll never be loved. Even your grandmother only pities you," she would whisper, her lips curling in disgust. When I cried, she laughed, then shushed me harshly. "Stop that noise before the neighbors hear. No one would believe you anyway. They know I'm a good mother." That was her favorite weapon, gaslighting. She had an uncanny way of twisting reality until I doubted my own pain. I'd stare at the mirror, the purple marks on my arm, clear as day, but Helen would stand behind me and say, "Those are mosquito bites. Don't be dramatic." And I wanted so badly to believe her, because believing otherwise meant admitting that the people who were supposed to love me were destroying me. Nights were the worst. Sometimes after Richard stumbled home drunk from the bar, he would throw me into the basement. The heavy wooden door would slam shut, the bolt sliding into place, and I'd be left in darkness so thick I could barely breathe. I'd curl on the cold concrete floor, hugging myself, whispering prayers I didn't even understand, hoping for morning. The basement smelled of mildew and dust, and the silence was broken only by the sound of my own sobs echoing against stone walls. My stomach twisted with hunger because dinner had been withheld as punishment for talking back. Talking back could be as small as asking for a second slice of bread. I remember one night particularly vividly. I was 9. I had asked Helen if she could sign a permission slip for a field trip to the Science Museum. She looked at me, her eyes icy, and said, "Do you think we have money to waste on you? You think you deserve to go where normal kids go? No, you're staying home." When I protested softly, saying, "But everyone else is going," she slapped me across the face so hard my ear rang for an hour. Richard came in then, hearing the commotion, and instead of protecting me, he dragged me by the arm to the basement. His grip was so tight I thought my bone would snap. He threw me inside and hissed, "Learn your place." The next morning, when neighbors asked why I wasn't on the bus for the trip, Helen smiled sweetly and said Margaret's not feeling well. She has such a sensitive stomach. They nodded sympathetically, and I stood behind her, silent, learning that my reality could be erased with a single lie. Holidays, which other children looked forward to, were just new arenas for pain. At Christmas, Richard would drink until his face turned purple, then scream that the decorations weren't hung right, that I had ruined everything. One year, when I was 11, he shoved me into the Christmas tree. Ornaments shattered around me, glass cutting into my palms. Helen rushed in not to help me, but to shout, "Look what you've done, clumsy girl! You've destroyed our tree!" My hands bled, but she didn't bandage them. She told me to clean the mess. I remember crouching on the floor, shards slicing my skin, tears blurring the twinkling lights, and thinking, maybe she's right. Maybe I ruin everything. That's what gaslighting does. It convinces you that the pain you're feeling is your fault, that you deserve it. The cycle was endless. Pain, denial, silence, repeat. When I tried to tell a teacher once, showing her the bruise on my shoulder, Helen appeared at the school the next day with cookies for the staff, charming everyone with her smile. "Margaret is imaginative," she said, laughing lightly. "She bumps into things, then spins wild stories. But she's our little dreamer." The teacher looked embarrassed, apologized to Helen, and after that, I never dared to speak up again. The betrayal wasn't just the blows, it was the way the world seemed to believe them over me. My voice didn't matter. I was trapped. I can still remember lying awake in my room, listening to the faint hum of a TV downstairs, the clink of ice in Richard's glass, the sharp rhythm of Helen's heels against the floor. I knew the pattern the fight would start, the shouting would rise, and if Richard's anger didn't burn out on Helen, it would find its way to me. I would press my face into the pillow, holding my breath, praying he wouldn't open my door. Sometimes he didn't. Sometimes he did. And every time I felt myself shrinking, becoming smaller and smaller until I wondered if one day I would just disappear. But deep inside, even then, a small spark refused to die. Every time Helen sneered, "No one will ever save you." A quiet voice in my chest whispered back, "Maybe someone will." Every time Richard locked the basement door, a sliver of determination told me that one day I would get out. I would breathe free air. I would live a life where no one could hurt me again. I didn't know then that Evelyn, my grandmother, had already noticed, had already begun to suspect, had already decided she would intervene. At the time, I only knew pain. But in the darkness of those childhood nights, the seed of resistance was already planted. And that seed, watered with every bruise, would one day grow into something strong enough to fight back. The turning point of my childhood came one humid summer afternoon when I was 12. I remember the air was thick cicadas screaming in the trees outside the wallpaper in the living room, peeling slightly from years of neglect. Richard had been drinking since noon, a bottle of bourbon sweating on the table. Helen was pacing, snapping her fingers, barking orders for me to scrub the floor again, even though I had done it that morning. When I hesitated, Richard lunged forward, his belt already sliding free from the hook. My heart sank. I braced for the strike. But before he could swing, the front door opened. Evelyn Carter, my grandmother, stepped inside. She had called earlier saying she wanted to check on us, but Helen had muttered she was too busy for visitors. Evelyn came anyway. She was small but formidable, silver hair, pinned back neatly, eyes that saw through lies. That day, those eyes landed on me. I was trembling, my back against the wall, my arms raised to shield myself. Evelyn's gaze dropped to the purple marks still fading on my forearm. Her lips pressed into a line. "What is going on here?" she demanded, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Richard lowered the belt but didn't hide it. "Nothing," he grunted. "The girl's being dramatic again." Helen swooped in with her sugar-sweet tone. "Oh, Mother Margaret bruises so easily. You know how clumsy she is. She falls bumps into things. We try our best, but she's such a handful." Evelyn ignored her. She stepped closer to me, gently taking my wrist, turning my arm to examine the marks. Her touch was soft, but her eyes burned with fury. "These aren't accidents," she said quietly, then louder. "These are beatings." The room froze. Richard scoffed. "Don't interfere in how I discipline my child." Evelyn turned on him, her posture straight regal. "Discipline? You call this discipline, I call it abuse." Helen's mask cracked for a second. "You don't understand. She lies. She makes us look bad." Enough." Evelyn snapped, her voice like thunder. "I raised you better than this, Helen. And if you think I will stand by while you destroy this child the way you've destroyed yourself, you are mistaken." Richard's face flushed crimson. "She's our daughter, not yours. Stay out of it." Evelyn's eyes narrowed, steel meeting fire. "She may be your daughter by blood, but you forfeited the right to call yourself her parents the moment you raised a hand against her. Pack her things. She's coming with me." My breath caught. Had I heard her right? For a moment, I thought it was another cruel trick, another dangling hope that would be ripped away. But Evelyn's grip on my wrist was firm, protective. She meant it. Helen's voice turned shrill. "You can't just take her. People will think we're monsters." Evelyn stepped closer until she was nose to nose with her daughter. "People will know you're monsters if I open my mouth." "Do you want me to go to the police? To the neighbors? To the church you pretend to serve every Sunday?" Helen faltered, words dying on her lips. Richard muttered curses under his breath, but he didn't move. For the first time, I saw fear in their eyes. Not fear of losing me, but fear of exposure, fear of consequences. Evelyn straightened, her voice final. "Get her things. Now. Or I'll call the authorities this instant." No one moved, so Evelyn turned to me. "Margaret, go upstairs. Pack whatever you want. You're leaving." My legs shook as I climbed the stairs. I had dreamed of this moment, whispered to myself in the basement, that someone might come, that someone might save me, but I never truly believed it. Yet here it was. I stuffed clothes into a bag, clutching the small teddy bear Evelyn had given me years earlier, the one Helen had tried to throw away. As I came down, Richard muttered, "If you go, don't think you're welcome back." Helen hissed, "You'll regret this, Margaret. You'll regret turning on your family." But Evelyn wrapped an arm around my shoulders and replied for me. "She's not turning on her family. She's finally finding one." We walked out into the sunlight, the door slamming shut behind us. For the first time in years, the air felt lighter. My heart pounded not from fear, but from a strange new feeling hope. The car ride to Evelyn's house was silent at first. I kept waiting for the dream to dissolve, for Richard's voice to thunder, for Helen's nails to dig into my arm. But all I heard was the steady hum of the engine, the faint scent of lavender from Evelyn's handkerchief. She finally spoke. "You're safe now, Margaret. They will never hurt you again." "I promise." I believed her. For the first time, I truly believed someone. That night, lying in a clean bed with sheets that smelled of soap instead of mildew, I whispered into the darkness, "Thank you." And though Evelyn was in the next room, I swore I felt her hear me. Moving in with Evelyn was like stepping into another universe. Her house, an old Victorian with stained glass windows and creaky wooden floors, smelled of lemon polish and fresh bread instead of stale liquor and fear. The first morning I woke up there, sunlight streamed through lace curtains, and for a moment I didn't recognize the sensation in my chest. It was safety. But Evelyn was not the type to coddle. She believed in discipline, the kind that nurtured rather than destroyed. At breakfast, she poured me oatmeal and said plainly, "You'll work hard, Margaret. Pain has taught you endurance, but now you need direction. I will give you that." And she did. She drew up schedules for me, chores, homework, reading. She opened a savings account in my name and dropped a crisp $10 bill inside every time I helped with her garden or her bookkeeping. "Money is not just for spending," she said, adjusting her glasses as she showed me how to balance a checkbook. "It is for building." I listened wide-eyed, soaking in her lessons like a thirsty plant finally given rain. School was different now, too. Without Richard and Helen's constant sabotage, I could actually study. Evelyn made sure I had notebooks, sharpened pencils, and even stayed up with me on nights before exams, quizzing me on history dates or algebra problems. When I came home with my first A, she smiled, not effusively, but with quiet pride. See what happens when you're given a chance. That pride became my fuel. Still, the scars of my past lingered. At first, I jumped whenever someone raised their voice. I hid food in my room out of habit. Once, Evelyn found a stash of crackers under my bed. She didn't scold me. She simply placed a full basket of fruit on my desk and said, "There will always be food here. You don't need to hide." Slowly, I began to trust. By high school, I was thriving. I joined the debate team where I discovered a voice sharp enough to cut through lies. Standing at a podium arguing a case, I felt the same fire Evelyn carried in her eyes when she confronted my parents. Words became my weapon. My peers clapped, my teachers praised me, and for the first time I was more than the girl with bruises I was. Margaret Collins, sharp, determined, alive. Evelyn was at every debate, meet her small figure in the back row, nodding approvingly when I made a strong point. "You have the makings of a lawyer," she told me one night, sipping her tea. Use that mind to fight battles worth fighting. The idea planted itself in me, growing roots. I applied myself relentlessly, pulling late nights, taking extra courses. When college applications came, Evelyn sat beside me at the kitchen table, glasses perched low, helping me edit essays. "Don't beg for pity," she advised. "Show them your strength." I was accepted to a state university on a scholarship. I still remember calling Evelyn from the payphone in the hallway at school, tears streaming down my face as I told her. She didn't cry, she rarely did, but her voice was thick. "I knew you would. Now go prove them wrong, every last one of them." College was a whirlwind. I worked part-time in the library, stacked shelves until midnight, then studied until dawn. It was exhausting, but compared to the basement of my parents' house, it felt like freedom. Evelyn sent me care packages, jars of her blackberry jam, handwritten notes, reminding me to rest sometimes, a crisp 20 folded inside, with the words, "For emergencies, not for fun." I never wasted a cent. I graduated with honors in political science, the first in my family to earn a degree. Evelyn stood at the ceremony, clapping slowly, her pride visible even through her stoicism. I looked out into the crowd, and for the first time, I didn't feel the absence of parents. I felt whole with just her. After graduation, I applied to law school. It was grueling, long lectures, endless case studies, late nights drafting briefs, but Evelyn's voice echoed in me. Fight battles worth fighting. I interned at a nonprofit for abused children, reading their case files, listening to their stories. Each one was a mirror of my past. Each one lit a fire in me to do more. Evelyn watched as I transformed from a timid girl into a woman who could argue before judges and negotiate with sharp-tongued attorneys. "You carry steel in your spine now," she said, once pride flickering in her eyes. "Your parents tried to break you, but instead they forged you." By my late 20s, I had secured a stable job at a respected law firm. I rented my own apartment, modest, but filled with light, filled with life. Evelyn visited often, bringing flowers from her garden, sitting at my table as I cooked her pasta. We laughed, we argued over books, we watched old films together. She became more than grandmother. She was mother, mentor, anchor, and I became not just her ward, but her partner in life's quiet joys. I thought the worst was behind me. I thought the shadows of Richard and Helen would never touch me again. But shadows have long arms, and though I was building a life brick by brick, they were still out there waiting for the chance to tear it down. The morning Evelyn died, the house felt different. I had visited her the night before, bringing her chamomile tea and sitting beside her as she rested in her favorite armchair by the fireplace. She looked tired but serene, her silver hair haloed in the glow of the flames. "You've made me proud, Margaret," she whispered before closing her eyes. I thought it was just fatigue. I didn't know it would be the last thing she ever said to me. At dawn, the phone rang. The sharp trill jolted me awake. A nurse from the hospital explained in clipped professional tones that Evelyn had suffered a massive stroke during the night. By the time I arrived clutching my coat against the cold wind, she was already gone. I remember the sterile smell of disinfectant, the quiet beeping of machines that had fallen silent. The sheet pulled neatly over her body. My knees buckled. I clung to the side of the bed, pressing my forehead against the fabric, whispering, "Don't leave me. Please, not yet." But she was gone. The funeral was held 3 days later. The church pews were filled with neighbors, colleagues, and distant relatives who came to pay respects. The air was thick with lilies, their sweetness almost suffocating. I sat in the front row, my black dress heavy with grief, as the pastor spoke of Evelyn's generosity, her strength, her unwavering principles. I felt both immense pride and crushing loneliness. She had been my anchor, and now that anchor had been cut loose. After the burial, I walked the familiar gravel path to her house, now mine, but unbearably empty. The grandfather clock ticked solemnly each chime, a reminder that time was moving forward whether I was ready or not. A week later, I was summoned to her attorney's office. The room was lined with leather-bound volumes, the air faintly smelling of tobacco and old ink. I sat in the same chair Evelyn had occupied so many times before, waiting for the executor to speak. He adjusted his spectacles, cleared his throat, and began to read the will. "I, Evelyn Carter, being of sound mind, do hereby declare this as my last will and testament." My heart pounded with every word. She left detailed bequests to charities, scholarships for underprivileged children, donations to the local library, funding for the women's shelter. That was Evelyn always thinking of others. Then came the final clause. "To my granddaughter, Margaret Collins, I leave the remainder of my estate, including but not limited to my home, all financial assets, investments, and personal belongings." The air seemed to freeze. The executor looked up at me. "Margaret, that means you are now the sole heir. By our calculations, the estate is valued at approximately $3 million. $3 million. The number felt surreal, like a figure on someone else's ledger. I didn't think of cars or vacations or luxury. My mind flashed to Evelyn teaching me to save pennies in a jar, her voice stern but kind. Money is responsibility, not indulgence. This wasn't wealth, it was trust. It was her legacy, her way of ensuring I would never again be at the mercy of others. Tears blurred my vision as I nodded. "I'll honor her," I whispered. The executor smiled gently. "I believe you will." Leaving the office, I clutched the envelope containing the official documents. The city outside bustled with its usual indifference. Cars, honking people, rushing vendors calling out, but for me, the world had shifted on its axis. I walked to Evelyn's house, pushed open the door, and stood in the entryway. The scent of her lavender soap still lingered. I looked at the staircase, the kitchen table, the garden outside, and every corner whispered her presence. And yet all of it now belonged to me, mine to protect, mine to carry forward. That night I sat at her desk spreading out the papers, the keys, the bank statements. My hands shook not from fear this time, but from the weight of responsibility. Evelyn had saved me once by giving me shelter. Now, even in death, she was saving me again by giving me the means to never be vulnerable again. I promised her then out loud I'll never let them take this from me. Not Richard, not Helen, no one. I didn't know then how soon that promise would be tested, how quickly the past would come storming back, demanding everything I had been given. It happened sooner than I expected. Barely a week after Evelyn was laid to rest, the past I thought I had buried with her came knocking. At first, it was subtle. A card left on the porch of the house. On the front, it said, "Deepest sympathies" in cheap gold lettering. Inside, only a few words, scrawled in my mother's handwriting, "We should talk." Mom. My chest tightened at the sight of those 3 letters. Mom. The word felt alien, jagged in my mouth. For 15 years, I had trained myself never to use it. To me, Helen was not a mother. She was a tormentor. I crumpled the card and threw it in the trash. But they didn't stop. 2 days later, a bouquet of lilies arrived at my office. The scent was cloying, invasive, a reminder of Evelyn's funeral. The note read, "We miss you. Please forgive us. Dad and Mom." I could almost hear Richard's voice as I read it, oily and insincere. The hypocrisy made my stomach churn. They had never once tried to contact me during college law school or my first years working. Not when I won debate trophies, not when I graduated with honors, not when Evelyn was in the hospital. Only now, when her will had been read and her fortune transferred, did they remember my existence. The third encounter was not subtle. I was in the driveway one evening unloading groceries from my car when a black sedan pulled up. The window rolled down and there they were. Richard Greer, but still broad-shouldered, leaned out with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Helen sat primly beside him, her pearls gleaming even in the dusk light. Margaret Richard set his tone dripping false warmth. "It's been too long." My hands froze on the grocery bag. The urge to run back into the house and lock the door was overwhelming, but I forced myself to stand tall. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice flat. Helen sighed theatrically. "Is that any way to greet your parents? We came to pay our respects, to reconnect. You can't shut us out forever." "I can actually," I said, turning toward the house. But Richard's voice dropped hard and sharp. "You think you can keep all of it, that house? The money, the investments? That was family money passed down through blood, and we are your blood." I spun back, anger rising like a flame. "Family! You locked me in basements. You whipped me until I bled. You told me I was worthless. You forfeited the right to call yourselves my parents the day you raised a hand against me." Helen's face contorted, the mask of sweetness slipping. "You ungrateful brat. We gave you life. Without us, you wouldn't exist. And without Evelyn, I wouldn't have survived. I shot back. She saved me. You destroyed me." Richard's eyes darkened and he stepped out of the car. Even after all these years, his presence still made my pulse spike. He walked toward me, slow and deliberate, until he was close enough for me to smell the faint trace of whiskey on his breath. He leaned in, his voice low so the neighbors wouldn't hear. "Listen carefully. You can make this easy or hard. Sign over a portion of the estate and we'll be gone. Refuse and you'll regret it. We know how to make your life miserable. We've done it before." My stomach twisted, but I refused to back down. "Try me," I whispered, my grip tightening on the grocery bag. Helen's voice carried across the driveway, sharp and venomous. Don't think people will believe you, Margaret. They never did before. Remember how we handled it last time? You tell your sob stories and we'll make you look insane again. Gaslighting is easy when the world already thinks parents know best. Her words hit like a slap, the familiar tactic, the weapon they had always used. But I was not the helpless child anymore. I was a lawyer now. I knew the law. I knew evidence, and I knew that truth had a way of breaking through lies. "Get off my property," I said, my voice steady though my hands shook. Richard smirked as if he thought I was bluffing. "This isn't over," he said, climbing back into the car. The sedan pulled away, taillights glowing red like eyes in the darkness. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the old house made me flinch. Every shadow looked like Richard looming in the corner. But beneath the fear was a spark of fury. They thought they could waltz back into my life, manipulate me with the same old tricks, and strip me of everything Evelyn had given me. They thought wrong. I sat at Evelyn's desk, the inheritance papers spread out before me, and whispered, "I promised you I'd protect this, and I will." From that moment, the battle lines were drawn. I knew they would come back harder, more desperate, but I was ready to fight. And this time, I wasn't the powerless girl in the basement. I was the woman Evelyn had raised me to be. The threats didn't stop at that driveway confrontation. If anything, they multiplied, wrapping around my life like weeds strangling a garden. At first, it was the phone calls. The number always came up unknown, but I knew the voices. Richard's growl. Helen's shrill insistence. "You think you can keep it all, Margaret. You're delusional. We'll drag your name through the mud. You'll wish you'd never been born." I stopped answering, but the voicemails piled up, each one uglier than the last. Then came the letters. They arrived folded neatly in white envelopes, but inside the words were venom. One note read, "Blood ties cannot be erased. Hand over what's ours." Another, "You'll never escape us." Sometimes they slipped them under the front door at night, so I'd find them in the morning curling at the edges from the damp. Every time I bent down to pick one up, my stomach twisted with dread. The attacks weren't confined to me alone. Helen turned to Facebook that stage where small-town gossip metastasizes into scandal. She posted photos of Evelyn's house claiming I had manipulated an old dying woman into signing away her estate. So tragic, one of her posts read, "When greedy children take advantage of elders." Comments from neighbors poured in, some sympathetic, others suspicious. Seeing my name slandered so casually, so publicly, made my blood boil. I wanted to respond, to scream the truth into every screen, but Evelyn's lessons whispered in my ear. Don't waste energy on their lies. Gather proof. Build your case. The escalation turned physical one night in the grocery store parking lot. I was loading bags into my car when I heard footsteps quicken behind me. Before I could turn, a rough hand shoved me forward. I stumbled the bag, tearing oranges rolling across the asphalt. Richard's voice hissed in my ear. "This is your last warning." My pulse roared in my ears. I spun, clutching my keys like a weapon, but he was already walking away, slipping into the shadows where Helen's silhouette waited by the sedan. People milled around, oblivious, no one seeing what had just happened. Rage and fear mixed inside me until I shook. That was the moment I realized they wouldn't stop on their own. They needed to be stopped. I called a colleague from the firm the next morning, a man I trusted, David Miller, sharp-minded, relentless in court, but with a steady calm that grounded me. Sitting across from him in his office, I spilled everything: the threats, the harassment, the shove in the parking lot, the smear campaign online. David listened, his brow furrowed. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. "Margaret, this isn't just nuisance behavior. This is harassment, intimidation, possibly assault. We can build a case." I swallowed hard. They'll deny it. They always deny. They'll twist it, make me look unstable, just like before. David leaned forward, his voice firm. "That's why we need evidence. Concrete, undeniable evidence. Do you still have the notes they sent?" I pulled a folder from my bag. Inside were the letters, each one slipped into a plastic sleeve. David flipped through them, his jaw tightening. "Good. Save the voicemails, too. Every call, every message. We'll subpoena phone records. As for the parking lot incident, any cameras nearby?" I thought back. "Yes. Above the grocery store entrance. Perfect. We'll file a preservation request before they overwrite the footage. His efficiency steadied me. For the first time since Richard and Helen had reappeared, I felt like I wasn't alone in the fight. But the days that followed tested me further. Helen began showing up outside the house, standing on the sidewalk with her arms folded, watching the windows like a hawk. Sometimes Richard would pace beside her, muttering loudly enough for me to hear, even with the windows shut. "We'll get what's ours, one way or another." Once I woke in the night to the sound of shattering glass. My heart slammed as I crept downstairs and found the front window fractured shards glittering on the floor. A half-empty whiskey bottle lay in the middle of the living room rug. I knew exactly whose hand had thrown it. I called the police, but by the time they arrived, Richard and Helen were gone. The officer took notes, promised to patrol more often, but his eyes carried that same look I'd seen in teachers and neighbors years ago. The look that doubted me, the look that thought maybe I was exaggerating. Gaslighting didn't need to be spoken aloud anymore. It was etched in their legacy. That night, I sat at Evelyn's desk again, the broken glass still crunching under my slippers, and swore into the silence. "You won't win this time. I won't let you." David's words echoed in my mind. "Build your case." So I bought a small recording device, slipped it into my pocket whenever I left the house. I set up cameras by the front door and driveway. I saved every email screenshot, every slanderous post. I became my own archivist of abuse, stacking evidence like bricks in a wall that would one day box them in. And through it all, I felt Evelyn's presence, as if she were standing beside me, steadying my hand as I documented every scar they tried to reopen. They had underestimated me once. They thought I was still the girl who cried in the basement, powerless and unseen. They were wrong. This time I was watching them too, and I was ready. The day of the hearing felt like stepping onto a stage where every scar I carried would finally be seen under the brightest lights. I arrived at the courthouse with David at my side, my palms slick with sweat, my jaw clenched so tight it ached. The old stone building loomed above us, its columns casting long shadows across the steps. I whispered to myself, "This is it, Evelyn. I promised you I'd protect what you built." Inside the courtroom smelled faintly of varnished wood and paper. Reporters clustered near the benches. Somehow the smear campaign had drawn attention beyond our small town. My stomach tightened at the thought of neighbors watching, of whispers spreading, but then I remembered the stack of evidence we had prepared. Truth doesn't tremble. Richard and Helen swept in moments later, dressed in black as though they were still mourning. Helen's pearls gleamed. Richard's tie was blood red. They carried themselves like victims, sighing dramatically, clutching tissues. When they spotted me, Helen pressed a hand to her chest and shook her head, as if heartbroken by my betrayal. I almost laughed. They hadn't changed. Still performers, still manipulators. The judge entered, a tall man with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "We are here regarding the estate of Evelyn Collins and the petition filed by Richard and Helen Collins contesting the validity of the will." His voice echoed off the walls. Richard's attorney, a slick, fast-talking man named Grant, stood first. "Your Honor, my clients were tragically estranged from their daughter, for years manipulated by external forces. They merely seek their rightful portion of the estate, which by blood and moral law belongs equally to them." Moral law. The words almost choked me with their hypocrisy. David rose calmly. "Your Honor, what we have here is not estrangement by chance, but abandonment, neglect, and abuse. Evelyn Collins rescued my client from the very people who now claim entitlement. We will present evidence not only of Evelyn's clear intent, but also of Richard and Helen's pattern of intimidation since her passing." The judge nodded. "Proceed." David began with the letters. He handed the stack to the clerk, who read them aloud one after another. The words, "You'll never escape us. Hand over what's ours," rang through the courtroom like poison dripping into water. Helen squirmed in her seat. Richard's jaw worked furiously, but they forced neutral expressions. Then came the voicemails. David pressed play, and Richard's voice filled the room. "You'll regret this. We'll make your life miserable." Gasps rippled across the benches. Helen's shrill tone followed. "We'll make you look insane again, just like before." That broke the mask. Murmurs rose as people exchanged glances. For the first time, the world was hearing what I had always lived. Grant objected, claiming the recordings could be doctored, but David was ready. He presented phone company records, timestamps matching perfectly. The judge's gaze sharpened. Next, David played the grocery store footage. Grainy but clear enough, Richard shoving me forward groceries, scattering his face, caught in profile. My throat tightened watching it, but a strange satisfaction bloomed too. Proof. No more hiding behind shadows. Helen erupted, standing to her feet. This is taken out of context. She's twisting everything. We were trying to. The judge's gavel slammed. Sit down, Mrs. Collins. You will have your turn. But her slip had already betrayed her. The audience saw not grieving parents, but aggressors cornered. David wasn't finished. He displayed screenshots of Helen's Facebook posts accusing me of manipulation. So tragic, the captions read. He pulled out witness statements, neighbors who had seen Helen loitering outside my house, the officer who had filed the report about the shattered window and whiskey bottle. Piece by piece, he stacked the wall higher until their denials had nowhere to breathe. Then came the twist, the evidence even I hadn't expected Evelyn to have left behind. David held up an envelope, its paper yellowed at the handwriting, unmistakably hers. Your Honor, this is a letter Evelyn Collins entrusted to her attorney to be read if her will was ever contested. My chest tightened as the judge unfolded it. Evelyn's words filled the courtroom steady and clear, even from the grave. To whomever questions my wishes know this. I leave everything to Margaret because she is my daughter in every way that matters. Richard and Helen abandoned her inflicted harm and forfeited their claim to family long ago. If they seek to profit now, let this letter serve as my testimony that my choice was deliberate and absolute. Silence blanketed the room. The words hung like a verdict already spoken. Helen's face went pale, her lips trembling. Richard slammed his fist on the table, muttering curses under his breath. The judge's eyes swept the courtroom. The will stands as valid. The evidence of harassment and intimidation is overwhelming. I am referring these matters to the district attorney for potential charges of harassment, intimidation, and assault. Helen gasped. Richard surged to his feet. This is a farce. She's poisoned you all against us. But the bailiff stepped forward, hand hovering near his holster. In that moment, the power shifted. For years, they had controlled the narrative, made me doubt myself, silenced me with fear. Now the truth roared louder than their lies. I stood my legs steady as stone. You always told me no one would believe me. Look around. They do now. You can't gaslight an entire courtroom. Helen crumpled back into her chair, sobbing. Richard's face twisted, caught between rage and panic. For once, they had no script left to perform. The judge adjourned, but the murmurs didn't fade. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras clicked. David leaned close, his voice low. We did it, Margaret. They can't touch you anymore. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just about me. It was about every child whose voice had been smothered, every victim told they were exaggerating. Evelyn's voice from the grave had sealed justice, but my voice had carried it across the finish line. As I stepped out of the courthouse into the crisp air, sunlight cut through the clouds. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was walking in shadows. I felt seen, heard, free. This wasn't just a legal victory. It was public revenge carved not through violence or secrecy, but through truth laid bare for all to witness. And the twist of justice was sweeter than any revenge I could have planned, because it left them with nothing but the reflection of who they truly were. The courthouse victory was only the beginning. Within a week, the district attorney filed charges: harassment, intimidation, destruction of property, and assault. Richard and Helen were summoned to appear, their names printed in the local paper's crime blotter section. I stared at the article, the black ink stark against white, and felt a strange mix of grief and relief. They were still my parents by blood, but now the world finally saw them as I had always known them: predators, not protectors. Neighbors who once whispered about me now whispered about them. At the grocery store, I overheard conversations cut short when Helen walked in. People stepped aside in the church foyer, offering her no more than polite nods. Richard's old drinking buddies stopped calling. Their social circle collapsed like a tent with its poles kicked out. The smear campaign backfired spectacularly. Those Facebook posts Helen had weaponized became exhibits of her malice. Screenshots circulated in local groups and sympathy flowed my way instead. "We had no idea what you went through," Margaret, one woman, told me at the farmer's market, her hand warm on mine. "We should have seen it." I only nodded. Recognition came too late to undo the years, but it mattered now. It meant their lies no longer defined me. Financially, they began to unravel too. Legal fees mounted. Grant, their attorney, withdrew after unpaid invoices piled high. Creditors called. Richard's temper flared in public one evening. He kicked the side of his car in the hardware store lot, yelling loud enough for passers-by to record it. The video spread online, captioned, "This is the man who harassed his daughter for money." But the deepest consequence wasn't financial ruin. It was exposure. Their masks had cracked beyond repair. Without an audience to believe their performance, they were just two bitter people aging into obscurity. One afternoon, Helen showed up at my gate, her once perfect hair disheveled, her pearls gone. She clutched the bars like a prisoner. "Margaret, please. We're your parents. We made mistakes, but family forgives." Her voice broke on the last word. For a moment, a younger version of me, 10 years old, hungry for any scrap of affection, stirred. But then, I remembered the shove in the parking lot, the shattered window, the years in the basement. Forgiveness without accountability isn't healing. It's surrender. I stepped onto the porch, my voice steady. "You taught me what family is not. Evelyn taught me what it is. That's all I need to know." Her shoulders sagged. Richard pulled her away, roughly muttering, "She'll regret this." But the threat rang hollow now. Empty. David filed a restraining order that week, and the judge signed it swiftly. They were barred from coming within 500 feet of me or Evelyn's property. The order was posted on the courthouse bulletin board, a final boundary carved in law. For the first time in my life, I felt safe. Not because danger had vanished, but because I had drawn a line and the world had recognized it. That night, I walked through the house Evelyn left me. The floors creaked beneath my steps. The air smelled faintly of lavender from the sachets she had tucked into drawers. I paused at her portrait above the fireplace. "It's over," I whispered. "They can't touch us anymore." My voice cracked on us because in many ways I still lived as if she were beside me. And maybe she was. The consequences had landed squarely where they belonged. Richard and Helen faced court dates, unpaid bills, social exile. I faced freedom. My scars didn't vanish, but they no longer bound me. The chains had shifted, clamped instead on the wrists of those who forged them. The girl who once cowered in a basement was gone. In her place stood a woman who had chosen her family, chosen her truth, and chosen her peace. Months passed, and the storm that had once consumed my days began to fade into memory. The court hearings against Richard and Helen stretched on, but for me, their weight lessened with each sunrise. My focus shifted not on them, not on the wreckage they tried to create, but on the life I could finally build. I started with Evelyn's garden. She had always loved her roses, pruning them at dawn with careful hands. That spring, I stepped outside with gloves too big and clippers that felt awkward, but I cut and tended until the thorny branches gave way to blooms. The first blossom opened pale pink, fragrant and fragile. I clipped it, placed it in a vase by her portrait, and whispered, "We're still growing, Grandma." Work at the law firm flourished. My colleagues, who had once only known me as the quiet associate, now looked at me differently. Strength has a way of changing posture, of making your voice carry farther. I took on pro bono cases, women escaping abusive households, teenagers fighting for emancipation. Each file felt like an echo of my past, and each victory felt like passing Evelyn's gift forward. But the truest extension of her legacy came when I launched the Collins Foundation. With a portion of the inheritance, I set up a trust dedicated to supporting survivors of domestic abuse and abandoned children. The first scholarship went to a girl named Lila, 16, with eyes both wary and determined. Watching her clutch that acceptance letter, I felt a circle closing, not of pain, but of possibility. Reporters reached out for interviews, fascinated by the story of the woman who fought her parents in court and turned tragedy into advocacy. I gave only a few careful with details, but I always ended with the same line. Family is not defined by blood. It is defined by love, by action, by who shows up when no one else will. As for Richard and Helen, they became shadows, convicted of misdemeanor harassment and placed under probation, burdened by debts they could not pay. They retreated into the margins of town. Occasionally, I glimpsed Helen at the pharmacy, had bowed her shopping basket nearly empty. Once Richard passed me on the road, his car was rusting, his gaze fixed forward. There was no confrontation, only distance, and distance was enough. Thanksgiving arrived again, the first, without Evelyn at the head of the table. I invited friends, colleagues, and even a few clients who had no place to go. The house filled with laughter, clinking glasses, the smell of roasted turkey and spiced cider. At one point, a little boy crawled under the table giggling, and I remembered my own childhood holidays spent in silence and fear. The contrast was staggering, almost surreal. I raised my glass and looked around at the faces glowing in candlelight. "This house was once a refuge for me," I said, voice steady. "Now it's a refuge for all of us." That's what Evelyn would have wanted. The room erupted in applause, not loud or dramatic, but warm and real. And in that warmth, I felt a peace deeper than any courtroom victory. Later that night, after the dishes were stacked and the guests had gone, I stepped outside. The air was crisp, the stars sharp against the black sky. I thought of Evelyn again, her steady presence, her faith in me when I had none in myself. "I kept my promise," I whispered. "I protected what you gave me. And I'll keep protecting others too." The moral of my story isn't about winning an inheritance or defeating villains. It's about survival, about choosing who deserves a place in your life and who doesn't. Blood may tie us together, but love is what makes a family. And sometimes the greatest act of love is protecting yourself from those who seek to destroy you. I am Margaret Collins. I was once a child abandoned, silenced, and bruised. Today, I am a woman unbroken, carrying forward a legacy not of money, but of resilience, justice, and compassion. If you take anything from my story, let it be this: you have the right to draw boundaries, to choose your family, and to rise from the ashes of betrayal stronger than before.